Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and welcome. Yes, you can turn. You should turn your mics on. And did you guys rehearse the song you were supposed to start with?
We did.
Go for it, Caitlin. All right. So I'll spare you the song. Although maybe it's going to be. I don't know. So a couple of quick announcements. Welcome and thank you for joining us here at Lowenstein Sandler in New York, and also by Zoom. A couple of quick announcements for which I need glasses.
I know.
Yeah. So if you'd like, even if you're in the room, if you want to participate in the chat so that you can share LinkedIn links and questions and, negative reactions and things with other folks who are on the Zoom, we welcome you to do that. You can point at the code on your little handout for today. Panelist bios are also available on the link to the Zoom so that you can participate there. We do want to get your questions from the chat and intersperse those. So that's why I've got this laptop that, I can't really see because it's kind of small and I'm apparently old. But we do want those. Also want to thank our Lowenstein Sandler colleague, Tolu Adateo, for doing some research for today's event. And we are looking forward to our September 28th session with Professor Jeff Busgang and Austin Clements and Aileen Lee and Karen Page. Folks can register for that as well. 6 of our Lowenstein Sandler partners, Leslie Adamo, Meredith Bouchaw, Alyssa Frederick, Sophia Makhtoff, Chandra Shi, and Kristen Taylor, are doing a Women in VC event, which is another in this amazing ongoing series. Key tax considerations for venture capital funds for founders and for operators. That's Thursday, July 20th, 2 to 3 p.m. And there's a link in the chat as well if folks are interested in that. And we are also going to have, for the folks in the room today, we're going to also have some in-person breakouts to discuss the things that we've talked about here after the panel session, and then we will ply you with alcohol, which you are not at all required to drink, but if you do, please do so responsibly and with proper etiquette, which I'm sure you're all going to do. All right. So we are supposed to be talking a little bit about branding and PR, your company's brand, your personal brand, but also how that interacts with your fundraise and with fundraising. And we had a couple of conversations before this session. And in one of those conversations, Rachel said that, Charles's story, the arc of his brand and what he's built from the first precursor fund and even before that to his time with the CIA. That's an amazing brand story. Can we get Charles to tell his brand story? But the three of you all have great brand stories. So instead of doing just your intro and what you invest in, can we do your brand story? And I'd love to go from Charles to Rachel to Caitlin, and I reserve my right to edit and for rebuttal. Welcome.
Wow, I don't even know where to start.
CIA, for sure.
The CIA, okay, yeah, that's probably a good question. So I worked for Incutel, the CIA's venture capital group, right out of college. It took a long time to convince my parents it wasn't a scam. I told them, they're like, they watch too many James Bond movies. And I don't know, sometimes you luck out and you attach yourself to an entity that people find really interesting. So in 2000, a lot of people were really curious about, well, what on earth is the CIA doing running around Silicon Valley trying to find people who want to work with them? So part of our job at Incutel was actually craft a story about why startup companies should want to work with the government. And that was an interesting messaging challenge because a lot of the people we were trying to pitch came into the conversation with a general belief that startups should not work with the government ever. Government's slow, it's bad customer, they don't pay, sales cycles are too long, insider game. I could go on forever. And ironically, like part of my job was to go around the valley and pitch other VC funds on why they should work with InQtel. So I like went around like a underpaid sales guy and would like show up in the conference room of big Silicon Valley VCs at all of 24 years of age and try to pitch them on why they should work with the CIA's venture capital fund. And so it was a good first experience of sort of like putting yourself out there and pitching. And I don't know, so many things I've done in my career have been about like branding or rebranding. Like when I joined Uncork, I'll skip everything in between. When I joined Uncork, that was a firm.
That's a wine shop in SF, or
it's a wine shop masquerading as a venture capital fund some days. But my old partner Jeff Pavia had started Uncork, and the brand of Uncork was very much his brand and his interest and him. And when I joined, he's like, "Hey, we got to kind of figure out how to make this something that can accommodate more people." And where when people hear Uncork SoftTech, they don't just immediately think me; they think about the team. So that was like an interesting thing. And then I don't know, when I started Precursor, I had this vision for building a fund where the people who didn't have deep social connections to venture capitalists and didn't have a ton of traction would feel at home. And anyone here who's raised any kind of money knows that like trying to raise money requires you to come up with a really clean, interesting story. And raising a venture fund is particularly true because the product you have is the same product that everybody else have, which is capital. And so it honestly took me about 2 years to figure out how to tell the story of Precursor in a way that felt differentiated, authentic to me, all of that. And like, I don't know, I've never had a PR person. I've never worked with anybody in marketing. I've never had like a brand person help me. Maybe I should. I've just done it all myself. And I've just always said like, I'm just going to try to be authentically myself in anything that I write or share or in any interaction I have with people. Just try to show up and be your best version of yourself that you can be that day. And here we are 9 years later at Precursor, like 200 million under management. I won't say how many funds we have under management because we're fundraising and all that good stuff. But yeah, 5.
I just said hi. Some people counted my fingers. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
And so before we move over, you also teach at Stanford and you teach venture, but you also do, in addition to your teaching responsibilities at the Graduate School of Business, you also teach CIA.
Oh yeah, so
folks about threats.
Ed has an impeccable memory. So one of the other things I do, I teach an entrepreneurship class at the GSB. I also do some executive education at the GSB. So 1 year I taught innovation to a group of people from Colgate, the toothpaste company, super fun. And then I got a call that said, "Hey, we have a very special group of people that we'd love to have you come do a one-day session for. We'll tell you more about it when you get here." I was like, "That's sketchy." And I got there, they're like, "Oh, it's basically some rising talent from the national security complex." I was like, I know who these people are. So I do most years a one-day seminar on like emerging technology trends that I think that subset of people should have at the front of their cortex, and talk a lot about what VCs are funding and what I think the impacts might be on national security and intelligence. Super fun class.
And last two quick things. Do you still have your security clearance?
No, I gave it back. Gladly.
That's your on the record story, is that you gave it back.
I gave it back.
And I'm not saying that you have participated in, but how many government overthrows have you participated in? Is it also high? 6, something like that?
I can't comment on that.
All right. All right. We'll come back to that because we also left out that you were the chair of the National Venture Capital Association, and we'll talk about their brand after. But Rachel, you want to talk a little bit about your story?
Sure. I also don't have any professional help in terms of branding or PR firms, but I think that when I think back on my kind of trajectory through this industry is that I always wanted to leave the room. Remember, I started investing in I'll date myself. Okay, so I graduated from business school in 1994, and this is the beginning of when private equity was still and venture was still fairly nascent, and there weren't very many women to be found. And I felt very strongly that I wanted to make an impression when I went into a room, and I wanted to make sure that I knew my shit. And I wanted people to think that she knows her shit. And so I was pretty determined. Even when I came out of undergrad, I was an engineer. I went to business school. I took all the finance classes. I took all the derivative classes so that no one would ever say my finance, knowledge there wasn't a gap. And so I think I carried that forward as I went to, I worked at some major investment banks, and then I worked at a big private equity fund that was like a $3 billion general one. And then I went to Time Warner, where I met my co-founder of Imagination Capital, Dick Parsons, and he ended up becoming my mentor. He was the CEO of Time Warner. We did the AOL Time Warner merger, and there was the 2000 bubble was something to live through in the venture space, to watch it collapse. And it was like nothing you'd ever seen, the inflation and the deflation. And so there we invested more in Series B companies. And I spent a lot of time during that period between 2003 and 2017. And Ed was nice enough to let me join some of these panels as the corporate VC. And I spent a lot of time educating people this is not the dumb money. And if you think I'm the dumb money, you aren't getting any of this. And to really define how corporate venture capital can work well within, a lot of the instructors that teach VC would always say, you don't want to take corporate money because it's going to be conflicts right and left. They're going to have their own agenda. And I think that you can structure corporate venture capital to work well for financial returns. We were profitable almost every single year of that fund's existence, except for one, which was 2008. And that was a tough 2008-9 in that year. And that was the second recession that I went through. And but I think that educating people on that, walking the talk, really telling you that this is how I'm going to work. You are not going to get a deal from Time Warner because I'm an investor. You are going to get access, and I will give you access, and I will take you to my divisions. And if you don't get the meeting, if they say they're not interested now, I will bring you back 6 months later. And we tracked how many partnerships were struck every single year. And I felt very strongly that was one of our KPIs, how many partnerships got struck. And so we really did try to deliver that access to our companies. And that's whole walk in the talk. And that's kind of my brand. So now I'm on several public boards, and people look to me as the person who probably will tell you straight out what I think. I'm not political. I don't do that well. I've never managed up particularly well, but you will get a straight answer from me. So that's kind of my brand.
So I like as your brand, by the way, knower of shit. I wanted people to understand that I knew shit. So you said you're not political. You are very political.
Well,
but there's and that I totally get and see. Can you talk about your board membership for years on the Center for Reproductive Rights? Which,
sure.
Thank you.
So I'm on 3 publicly traded company boards currently, but for 5 years, I was also on the nonprofit board of the Center for Reproductive Rights, which is a very important organization that uses the power of the law to try to uphold reproductive rights in this country. And it was also the entity with a lead lawyer that argued the whole women's health case that actually we thought had pretty much affirmed the right to an abortion in this country. But we also argued the Dobbs case and lost. And so it's been a very challenging time. And so, yes, I believe in, again, walking the talk. And I've always voted on my abortion rights stance. And so, yes, what's happening now is frustrating. Put it nice.
Yes, and you and I have commiserated on past panels, including I think we were on one the day that the election was called for Trump, which was painful. But that is part of your brand because you have been public about the things that are important to you. You also said that you're not good at managing up. which is fascinating to me because your business partner is a legendary CEO who was your boss. So you're reasonably good at managing. No?
I deliver. I deliver. My job was to make him look smart, and I think when I was Dick Parsons' right-hand person from 1996 to 1998 when we were buying Turner Broadcasting and restructuring the Time Warner Cable partnerships, and my job was to prep him and to get him ready to go in and look smart, and I.
And to what extent does your current, I'll call it a fund, it's not a fund, which I'm going to ask you to explain, but to what extent does your current fund create an intertwining of your two brands and your equals in this fund, but is there still a like mentor-mentee thing, or, given that he is a legend, how does that intertwining of those two brands work?
I mean, Dick Parsons is, he's a great human being, first and foremost. And I feel very, lucky to have been able to found a business with him. The way that it works between the two of us is it's really become, we are now, I've known him since 1996. And so we are good friends. And I think that our partnership works through a friendship. It is no longer kind of, well, he makes me better because I really respect what he thinks, and he is the people filter. I rely on Dick to tell me, what does he think of this founder, and if we have this criteria, which is we don't back assholes, and he is the arbiter of that. So he gets to decide this is a yes or a no on a person basis. But aside from that, I do a lot of the sourcing, I do a lot of the diligence, and so we trade it off that way. But it is very much a kind of an equal basis. And what Imagination Capital is, it is actually funded 50-50 between Dick Parsons and myself. We both did well at Time Warner. And so we have no LPs. We have a portfolio of around 26 investments now, and we've had some exits, and we split each investment, and our check size is usually $250K to $500K, and then we allocate another couple $100K to participate in extension rounds, which we think are important for our portfolio.
Great. All right. Thank you for that. And Caitlin, you have been an original piece of the New York startup tech venture ecosystem for a really long time for someone your age. And having met you very early in that, it's been really awesome to watch the way that you have built a personal brand and the places that you've been and the impact that you've had on those places. Can you talk a little bit about your trajectory, starting with old New York and you, or maybe going back before that?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't know the backstory. I know both of you too. I didn't know the backstories, and I'm like, I might pull like an AI trick and like hallucinate a little bit about my past. I'll make some stuff up, and you guys can figure out as well, just so I can compete. So I moved to New York in 2010, right out of college, and I guess my career is mostly been in around. It's actually completely been in and around New York tech. So I did a couple startups. I joined a venture firm called Flybridge. Actually, Jeff Busking, who many of you will meet, was one of my first venture bosses. And then I went to business school. I thought I wanted to start a company because I had insane founder envy. I loved being around founders. That's why I worked at startups. That's why I worked in venture. I tried to start a couple companies, and I was like, "Ooh, I am not a good founder." And I think I knew too much. I knew I needed to find the right person. I needed to find the right kind of problem I wanted to solve. And in struggling to do that over the course of a couple of years, I decided that I'm a much better coach than a player, and I really wanted to chase venture. So then I've been at 2 venture funds since business school, but all in, I've been in the New York tech ecosystem since 2010. I usually say I built a very unintentional curriculum of New York tech. And I decided to be in New York simply because I did not like San Francisco, and LA was not really a thing yet. So I kind of defaulted into New York, and once you're here and in the community, and it's such an incredible community, and you grow, you kind of decide to stick around. So I was at a company, I first joined a company called Behance, which was kind of like a LinkedIn for creative professionals. I joined as a employee number 12. And I was there as they raised the Series A. I switched gears to go work for a female founder I had admired for a long time, a woman named Alexa Von Tobel. She started a company called LearnVest. And I was there kind of as employee 30 as they scaled to 100 employees. And then I joined Flybridge. So I could kind of take that experience and those learnings and kind of look at the space from a different lens. And then after business school, I went to FirstMark. I was there about 1.5 years and I switched gears to join Lair Hippo. So I'm a partner at Lair Hippo. We're an early stage seed fund. We're investing out of Fund 8, which is about $150 million seed fund. We raise it every 2 years. And we've got a couple of kind of later stage vehicles. And really for me, I think, I guess my brand, I really thought about my brand. It's a good exercise. I think for me, I kind of have I've met a lot of fantastic investors and I've met a lot of fantastic founders. And I think as a younger person kind of growing up in the ecosystem professionally, where mentorship really isn't too much of a thing, apprenticeship is not really a thing that happens in venture, you kind of have to like cobble together some things that you want to be like and more often some things you don't want to be like, because there isn't really a mold or a framework for who to be like. Especially as a younger woman in venture, there were very few women I could kind of look up to and be like, that's a model I want, that's a model I want. And Ed was actually instrumental in helping me kind of meet a lot of incredible female investors. And so I think that the way that I describe myself as an investor, and I think the way that my founders will describe me is, I always hear the word authentic. It's what people say about me. I don't know what I'm authentic about, but that's like one. I often get kind of like self-aware of kind of like the dynamics, especially in venture. Like I really consider the power dynamic at play between an investor and a founder. I think I like to carry myself in a way where I think in venture, I'm in the service business. Like I really am an invited guest at the table. Like founders are doing, many in the room, you guys are doing the hard work. You're the ones sacrificing, finances, social lives, making trade-offs with all sorts of things. You're choosing one thing to dedicate your time to. And for me, I'm not doing that. And so I think when I sit down with a founder and when I invest in a company, I really like to kind of keep that in mind. And really be as helpful as possible and not detractive. I think that's really important. Because again, I'm just trying to help you along in your journey. And I think with that, there's a saying that one of my mentors told me, which is, it comes from somewhere. And everyone says it comes from somewhere else. But it's like, victory has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan. And it's like, you can see that play out on Twitter. It's like when someone raises an A or when a company exits, it's like all these investors like, oh my God, like I'm so glad like to have invested in your Series A. This was, like I knew back then 10 years ago that you were gonna, and like, I hate that. I think my brand is antithetical to that. And then as soon as the company doesn't do well or shuts down, you hear nothing. It's like crickets. And I think you have to own the wins and the challenges. So I think I'm like unapologetically anti that. I might talk about it a little too much. But yeah, I think those are some of kind of like the brand tenets that I ascribe to be. And I think there's also, I think because I've been in New York for so long as a young person and I've kind of like climbed up, I have gotten an opportunity to know a lot of people and I've had a lot of fantastic mentors on my journey that have kind of like grabbed me by the back of my shirt and pulled me forward. And I've been connected to a lot of great people. And I think that's kind of compounded to an odd reputation where like I know everybody. And so when you know everybody in a community, I think it's really important to have like a pretty clean and positive reputation, because venture and startups is an ecosystem where like the community is small, the community compounds, like how you show up one day is kind of can be a lasting impression. And I think it goes back to kind of my belief system, which is like, you just have to be as helpful as possible. And if you're having a bad day, you can say you're having a bad day. If you say something terrible, you owe someone an apology. Like you just have to have that mentality, I think, as an investor. And I don't think it's a common one that I see. So hopefully we see more and more of that going forward. That's I guess just talk myself through a brand persona. So okay, I guess it's a brand. And I work at a firm that has Lair Hippo is like a very well-known brand, particularly in New York, and we invest in a lot of brands. So we were the first investors into kind of like one of the first investors in the whole like D2C movement. So we were the first check into Glossier, Warby Parker, Allbirds, Casper, Everlane, all of those fun ones. I've had the opportunity of investing in a number of like next generation brands, which I love. So I love the deal in a company called Topicals, which is a next gen skincare company for people of color. We invested in Parade, which is kind of like a Gen Z underwear company. I have a focus pretty much on underserved markets and kind of unmet opportunities, and that's where there's a real brand opportunity. But on the founder side, making a brand and making a brand and building a brand is all about having brand DNA, some sort of sense of what you're building, who you're serving, things like that. So it's my little brand TED talk for LH.
That's great. I want to go back to your comment about how much you don't like it when people on Twitter or whatever say, you know, oh yeah, I'm proud to have written the first check, and I knew you when, and I, you know, declaring like staking your claim to the win. And the reason I want to push on this is, isn't that a big part of how venture funds make their brand, by bragging about their wins? And we did a little exercise. So there's a founder only session for the startups in the program, and there's a link in the chat to so that you can see who the startups are in the program. And we did an exercise where we were talking about, you know, someone mentioned like their tier 1 venture targets that they want to get to as investors. And so we went through a list, and it was a fascinating exercise. And then the question is like, how do you get on that list? Is it because you've made great investments? Is it because you've done amazing PR for yourself? Yeah. So isn't that part of the way that works?
I mean, it's a good question for the founders. It's like, where did they get their information, right? So is it like this Forbes Midas listing? Maybe. Is it actually on Twitter following all these investors and like, you know, seeing them congratulate themselves? Maybe. I would guess it's more, I'm like, hopefully founders are not spending time doing that. I think that's investors, like getting investors in a frenzy. You know, it's like investors love to brand themselves to each other. It's like a big FOMO market. I think more likely it's, you know, I think it's probably like the big press around lists. And I think it's probably talking to their founder friends about, hey, who's really interesting and who's really compelling. And I think we're going through a shift where founder referrals and a founder saying, hey, I'm so excited to exit this company. Big thanks to this investor, this investor, this investor. Like that should be the thing that matters. And I think we're going into a market, I hope, in the next 5 years where we're going to see founders reference investors we haven't yet really heard of. Because I think there's a big changeover. And I think we're seeing in down markets, you see a lot of really bad behavior from some of the investors we all know and are all very famous. And I think that the market is refreshing with new investors that are going to be a lot more helpful, a lot more value add, a lot more like kind of supportive of founders to some extent, and probably like a lot less flashy. Now, I'm going to say, I said all this, but I don't fundraise for our firm. I don't know the value of the brand that I have and how that translates into me being able to fundraise, which is the venture capital business. Like it's a core part of the job. And I think you two probably know this way better than I do. So I'm chirping from some cheap seats right now.
You know, the thing I would add though is I do that thing where I, you know, where, you know, congratulations. So like I have a company that just got into space and they actually made communication with their droid and they were so excited. And so
it just got into space.
They got into space. They actually built from scratch.
Hold on.
But you know, so on LinkedIn I reposted their thing and I said, you know, I was like so proud of them. It was like, and And then the founder actually he commented, he's like, oh, thank you so much for your support. And it actually does sometimes help them build their brand because I mean, you do have a big audience probably on LinkedIn and on other
and just to clarify, one, you always have to say something when someone goes into literal space. Like, but there's a difference between, hey, like, you know, like giving your company props and then, versus claiming some like claiming like your responsibility or like you got to let the founders, and I know you don't do this. Like you have to let the founders, they win themselves. Like it's their win.
That's right.
And a lot of investors will try to pull things back and it's like, you know,
that's true.
You don't do that. I know you don't.
But I do like to I mean, sometimes it is part of their brand.
You have to press up your companies. Yeah.
And we say like never steal the founder spotlight.
Yeah.
Like don't redirect something they did that's amazing and say, because of my august judgment in investing in this company, they've gotten to space. That's actually not
right.
I find it as cringe as you do when I'm like,
yeah,
you took something that was someone else's accomplishment and recentered it on yourself.
Yeah.
Let them have the accomplishment.
Yeah.
Like be happy for them. Yeah. Amplify that. Yeah. And I too find that quite distasteful.
Great. Well, we won't do it. And then in 5 years, the venture, our Twitter, our threads will look very different, and it'll be great. And I don't know how you guys will find the best investors, but I assume you'll find them and us.
Yeah, I mean, if there's still a venture industry then, but who knows? So
That's true.
there is this whole, so since we're talking about branding and storytelling as part of branding, you can actually raise your pre-seed round purely on storytelling. You can probably also raise your seed round purely on storytelling and then on saying things like, I have so-and-so already, you know, committed and you should just fall in line behind them because that actually works. Maybe it shouldn't, definitely shouldn't, but you know, how far can you, am I wrong about how far you can get on storytelling? And if you can actually get that far in storytelling, how much time, energy, money should you invest in storytelling at that stage?
Good.
I certainly would say I have seen companies get to the Series B on storytelling. Like depending on the environment, definitely in 21, there are people who got pretty far down the road purely on storytelling.
That's a strong market.
It's a strong market. In today's market, you can get through the seed. I have someone who just got through the seed really on a story-driven fundraise, as we would say. I think I would separate getting really good at telling a succinct story about your company that works for your customers, your employees, and your internal teammates and people you want to recruit, which I think is separate from how many times do you show up in Forbes, TechCrunch? Are you spending too much time on Twitter? Like, I would really differentiate those activities. One of them I think is like highly constructive, figuring out how to make sure that your customers really understand your value proposition, understanding your employer brand to people who are thinking about joining your company, making sure the people in your company understand the company's mission, vision, and values. Those are all to me highly useful things. I've certainly worked with some people who spend a lot of time on Twitter, some of which, or on whatever social platform of choice. And it's not always clear to me how that work connects to creating value for the company. Sometimes I'm just like, wow, you have a lot of anxiety and you clearly are channeling that like anxious energy into social media. In other cases, I'm like, I feel like you're more interested in your own personal brand than making the company's brand better. And like, oftentimes I find that highly correlates with people who kind of know that their company's unlikely to be successful and they're already thinking about how to position themselves for the next thing. And like the sympathetic part of me says, being a startup founder is really hard. It's lonely. Being active on social can give you a dopamine hit that no amount of like, that might take you weeks or months to get from shipping a new feature to a customer. And I think you have to like resist that drug. But yeah, I don't know. I worry about people where I'm just like, you're doing too much of this for an audience that I think ultimately doesn't matter.
My view on it is that I think that you can get through, in fact, not even get through, you have to be able to tell a story from the launch through your institutional seed. And it is like, because you don't have enough product, probably not enough traction, probably not enough customers. And if you cannot tell a story that fleshes it out and makes someone see it as a big opportunity in the venture market, I mean, you can make a small business, but then you probably shouldn't be fundraising from venture funds. I think you can, but you have to tell a story then. It has to be where, you know, the investor leaves me going, okay, I want to get on board that story because I could see that person executing their way to actually making that idea into reality. But if you don't have any, and I've had founders who can tell that story and have raised tens of millions of dollars in good markets, and then all of a sudden you hit this market. And this market is like your Series A market. You've got to have, Series A's now are 8 to 10 million. You've got to figure out what metric you're going to take the 8 to 10 million you're going to get to. And then what have you done that makes me believe that in 24 months that you have enough traction to get to that metric that you're going to tell me you need another $10 million for. And this market is where you're going to see, I think this year you're going to see a good number of shutdowns of companies that have raised a decent amount of money that have no metrics or traction to actually back it up. And no amount of storytelling gets you through, I don't think, a B. I mean, I used to do a lot of Bs at Time Warner. And I would always say, shame on me if those things go down, because I think by a B, I should be able to see enough that I should at least have a chance to even capital back. I mean, I don't even want to take a haircut to it. And so I think that Bs now are big. I'm not a momentum investor. So I, even despite my space investment, it's a little bit of an outlier. It's a moonshot.
It's a rocket ship.
It is.
So.
But I mean, I really do think that B investors are pretty analytical, and they start to move into by the C and the D. Now I've seen some C and D investors that I can't believe are C and D investors. They have a mindset still of a A or C investor, but by C and D, they should be looking at dollar gain. So they should look at cash on cash dollar gain. It's a dollar gain as a private equity business is. And so the actual amount of dollar gain matters. And so just be aware of that. There's a shift in the mindset of the investor and what their LPs expect, right? So if you're in a private equity market, they are looking at, they want 3x returns. They want very minimal chance of losing capital. And a 3x return is a win, right? So, but that requires profitability and leverageability.
I think just like what I'm hearing is like, you just have to know your audience, right? And you have to sell to your audience, whoever that is. It's, you know, for an early stage investor, for a seed investor, it's getting me like super excited about a big vision. For a candidate that you're trying to hire, it's getting them excited about what you're building, kind of like specifically cater to their skill set and how they're going to contribute to the overall goal. If you're setting the vision, it's, you know, communicating with your co-founder and getting people excited and picking like, you know, the one word mission of the company. Like as a CEO, you're always communicating. And really as the company grows up, you have 3 jobs, and it starts to get a little repetitive, but your job is to raise money, always make sure the company is well funded, set the vision of the company and strategy, always be thinking about it, revamping it, taking in all the information happening in the world when there's a crisis, when there's not, making sure you're sound, and then hiring the best people around you. You don't really get to write code anymore. You don't really get too deep in like you kind of know the model, but you've got a CFO, like that's your whole life, 30%, 30%, 30%. And that requires a lot of comms, a lot of communicating, a lot of storytelling, knowing the audience, all of that. And that's why that passion for what you're building becomes so critical, because you say the same thing over and over again, and you're constantly, you have an anxiety that, does this story make sense in today's world? And that's kind of the tension I think founders always have. And if you're talking to PE, it's a different story. It's same numbers, right? Everything's got to be, same numbers, same everything, but you're shifting it a little bit differently based on the audience to get them excited.
And there's a comment in the chat that female, Black, and other underrepresented founders need storytelling. And this is Jana Meyerowitz-Turner. Earlier, because there's a baseline of trust that white men have that underrepresented founders simply don't have, unfortunately. And I think that that is a valid insight. And I'll also use examples of, there are venture funds that are fairly like straightforward and easy to understand. And there are venture funds that have a little more complexity. I'll use 2 people who are in the room today as examples of have a little more complexity. And when you add that intersectional layer of also not like a straight white dude, the storytelling part probably does become a lot more important. And, Jewel Burke-Solomon from Collab is here. Amazing story, started a company, sold it to Google, ended up having this big job at Google. And oh, by the way, raising a venture fund on the side. And oh, by the way, it does some non-traditional things. And it's in Atlanta, which is an amazing place to do venture, but it is not the primary market in the US. And it is not like the first city people think of as the mecca of venture capital. And similarly, Molly Fowler, who spun Dorm Room Fund out of First Round Capital, where she had worked for years, Dorm Room Fund has its own unique way of approaching the venture market, and being able to tell that story and also tell the story of how Dorm Room Fund is a force for diversity, equity, inclusion within venture. Like, you've got to work on the story if it's not straightforward. So if it's, we're going to go into outer space, good, because you've already lost a big chunk of your audience, right? Like, a lot of people in venture aren't going to invest in that company. If it's, we do enterprise software, or we do financial services technology, like, okay, now, you've got your audience and where to pivot into, but how much effort at seed and at pre-seed do you need to hire someone if you're not great at putting together a deck? Do you need to hire someone to help you with the storytelling if you have like some atypical features to your company or to the fund that you're trying to raise?
I wouldn't hire anyone before you've raised money. And I think you just need to practice. Like, I think candidly, like, it's almost like you're job interviewing, like, find a couple of trusted friends that have, either some background in startups or entrepreneurship to some extent, and just be like, I'm going to throw a bunch at you. I want you to tell me what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And then we're going to run it again. And then we're going to run it again. And then we're going to run it again. Like it does need to be pretty locked in and solid. Like, I personally wouldn't go into a pitch without having my pitch practice probably 100 times. Like, you get one shot per fund, and to get to the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. And I think it's really, really, really critically important. And I advise my founders that we've even done seed investments and A investments. I'm like, listen, like, I know you really want to go with Sequoia, and I know you want to go with Excel, but I'm going to throw you to pitch to these people first, because you're going to mess up, and you're going to mess up a lot. And like, we all say weird things. Like, we all say weird things a few times when we're nervous, and you need to practice pitching through being nervous, and you need to get a sense of all the questions you're going to get asked so that you're ready to go when it really matters. And I think that, like, don't be afraid to do that, and don't like treat it like you're an athlete. I think like practice makes permanent, and you kind of like default on your most basic level of training. So like, make sure that you're really trained for that, and it's going to pay off. And like, to be able to do this kind of when you're asleep is amazing, because you're going to be doing it for the whole life cycle of your company. So I think it's critically important.
So before we ask Charles to tell us what the pitch line is for the NVCA, which I do want Charles to do, there's a question in the chat from Cuthbert Onekute. As we're talking about story, how and when should we be telling? If a deck is 10 to 14 pages, how much of storytelling can we do? Is the storytelling just constantly repeating and educating everyone you meet? I think that's a great question.
I mean, I use like one simple, like Caitlin, we spend a lot of time trying to help people fix their stories. And I find oftentimes people struggle with decks because the story is actually not clear in their own head. And I don't know that I've not found very often that someone else can help you fix that. They can tell you, hey, this isn't clear. Like, they can give you feedback, but there aren't that many people I've met who can literally put the words in your mouth and then have you repeat those words effectively in an environment where that person's not sitting right there. So you eventually have to master your own story. So like Caitlin, like I tell people the litmus test is every VC meets tons of companies. if you pitch them on Monday and they go into a partner meeting next week without you, could they retell the basics of your story without you in the room? Like 90% of the first drafts of decks I see fail that test, and they fail it horribly. They're like word jumbles, all these diagrams. I'm like, this is like what it looks like in your brain. Remember, you're pitching somebody who doesn't know you, doesn't maybe know your industry super well, is going to do 100 of these every couple, like to stand, like simplicity and clarity is what makes these things stand out. So that I think that's a big part of what we try to help people understand. And we do have some founders who literally have no connectivity. They don't have any friends who are startup founders. They're first-time venture-backed people. That's where we help as investors. I'm like, I'm going to put you in front of 5 or 10 people in our portfolio community who've told me, hey, if you have people who are struggling fundraising for the first time, I will serve as that coach or friend if they don't have their own network.
How do they get to you in the first, if they don't have a bunch of connectivity into this world? And this was actually one of the questions that the founders wanted to know from the session just before this. How do they get onto your radar so that they actually get to know you? Is it that they go to a conference, that someone writes something about them, they do a blog post, they're very active on Twitter, congratulating themselves about something? Like what? How do they get to know you?
I'm really
if they
gonna
don't know
regret
people?
saying that, especially now that it's live streamed.
It's your brand.
My brand.
But aside from getting to people directly, you can just Google pitch decks. There are tons of pitch decks available. A lot of firms actually put out what they're looking for in a pitch. I think that
Sequoia.
Sequoia definitely has one. I mean, I don't know how many ads I've gotten from Business Insider. See pitch decks from like the last decade. I mean, I have Google and I actually have gone looking to look what they have, and they have real pitch decks there. I mean, you can, I hate to say, you can search for them, and they do have a lot of different stories that have been told, and there are common themes. And then there are a lot of firms that will put literally out there and what they're looking for. And these are usually the bigger firms that have templates for you. And so I don't want people to think that, they've got to get access to an investor to get, because I mean, that's very special what you
Also,
offer, like give people access to that, but I think that people can find.
Also, like a lot of these, actually look at them, they're not amazing.
Right.
It's like not the visuals,
Right.
It's not the design, it's the narrative. Someone's like, I get a designer. And I'm like, well, yeah, it shouldn't look terrible. Don't let the design get in the way. But like, I don't know, like we were an investor in front, like Mathilde's first deck, it's just really clear. It's not that it's like the most beautiful. And so I tell people, like, the one thing to Rachel's point, looking at these decks, you'll realize that it's very rarely that they're these like visually stunning, like works of art. It's that the narrative arc of like why the company matters and what you have to believe to be true is like ultra clear in the first 3 slides.
Yeah, unless like there's a reason that your particular business and your background dictate that it should be visually stunning, in which case, like, yeah.
Yes.
So, but what are you looking at? How does someone jump above the noise and get to you? Because you kind of famously, and you have a huge reputation, and everyone thinks you're such a great, nice individual, Charles. But you're only one partner. How do you get it? You do.
Yeah.
How do they get your time?
I want to go back to something Caitlin said, which is like, don't waste your one shot. So my phone number is actually not that hard to find on the internet. People will call me.
We'll share it in the chat.
People will call me sometimes and I pick up and they're like, I'm like, well, you called me. I didn't think you were going to pick up. Okay, well, I picked up. You got me right now. What do you do? What are you up to? What can I do to help you? I'm like, you got me. Like, you put the thought into finding my phone number and you called me and you like actually weren't prepared for me to pick up the phone. That is the experience I have 90% of the time. People call me. I think I was like, well, if it had gone to voicemail, what were you gonna leave me a voicemail?
They would have hung up.
You would hung up. Some sort of like, you went through you did all of the hard things. And then you like blew it. You blew it. And I'm sort of like, God, I don't understand that mentality. So I probably meet 2,000 teams a year. What I'm looking for is a spark. I'm looking to learn something about a problem that I didn't already know about when I got on that Zoom. And I'm looking to believe that this person has figured out enough about this problem that they have some kind of edge. The edge can be an insight, the edge can be experience, the edge can be relationships, the edge They educate, give you anything. Like some of our most successful founders are people who had no experience whatsoever in the industry that they were in. They just had like a really clear idea about a product or service that should exist. And in some ways, their lack of knowledge is what, like a perfect example, like today, like one of our portfolio companies, Bobby Baby, announced that they bought a formula factory and raised the Series C round of $70 million. That's a founder who had never shipped an FDA certified product, never done manufacturing, tech executive, but like in a totally different domain, but was like super passionate about like making infant formula in the United States in an FDA certified way. And I was like, all right, I believe this person can succeed. So I don't know, like a lot of it is like, I'm looking for someone who sparks, because most people are just, they're good and they're fine. Yeah. It's actually not that often I meet someone that's like, wow, this person feels wholly unqualified to be an entrepreneur. I'm looking for the people that really like spike.
And I think that the spike thing, like, you know, we talk, I totally agree. There's a little bit of a feel that I think I have as an investor, which I've been trying to like figure out, you know, you can't throw something ambiguous out there. And I think it's a couple of things. It's like, and they all add up. Like, you know, I'm not like this, like, I can't like see into the future really, but I can get excited about a future that you tell me about. And that comes out by your level of excitement on the company, you knowing answers to questions that I'm asking as I'm trying to understand, you telling me why now is the right time to be building this company, you telling me what you think some of your risks are when I ask, because I'm literally learning as you're from you. I think it's like, you know, are you following up really quickly after? If I say like, hey, do you know, send me your deck, send me your model, like, is there an email in my inbox that evening? Even better if it's that an hour later. Like, you keep the momentum going, you can sell, you can push. Like, I get a feeling of like, wow, this person is really persuasive. Like, I think they, you know, they mentioned they're going to pull someone out of Amazon. Like, oh, that's really compelling. Like, they can show that they have grit and perseverance and they're thinking strategically about who they might need. Like, there are all these little cues and clues you can kind of pick up in a conversation. And I think all of that adds up to be this idea of like a spark or a sparkle. And you're just kind of like, you get this feeling of like, this person is just going to like run through walls. And maybe the business works, but like, this person is going to make it work. And maybe this company pivots, but this person is going to figure it out. Like, that's sometimes what it comes down to. And it's some of those traits. And we all know people like that. Like, you all know someone who, you know, I kind of think about early in my career, one of the ways I thought about like, do I have conviction on this company? Because all your bosses in venture teach you like, you got to have conviction, you got to have conviction. I don't know. And it was like, would you put your paycheck behind this founder? Like, you know, would you put half your paycheck this year behind this founder? Do you think it would really return something for you? And like, that's when you're kind of like, there's a real difference when you find someone where you say yes, and you're like, oh, I don't know, like, I'm just not sure. And when you find the yes, like, that's the conviction, that's the sparkle. And we all know people like that. You can kind of think about that in your mind. You're like that for sure. So that's also like another way to kind of back in this idea of really showing well in some of these meetings and the tactical things you can do from that.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I would add is that you do need to know what firm and who you're talking to. Because I mean, I think that both Caitlin and Charles are more open to finding the unique entrepreneur, the unique story. That isn't exactly how I run. I'm pretty clear that I want to find an industry shift. So something is happening in your industry that is going to give you tailwinds, that there is like a paradigm shift that's happening. For example, the space company, the privatization of space and the increased amount of space debris. That is something that I believe I have conviction on. So that is important. And if there isn't an industry shift to give that entrepreneur tailwinds, we probably won't get there, even if it is a sparkly entrepreneur. I also
but
am
you might
biased.
send that person to me.
Okay.
Yes, like,
yes,
right? Like,
yes.
And that can be kind of like, if you find yourself in a scenario where you might be pitching the wrong fund, like, we're all friends. We all share stuff back and forth. I harassed Charles like 3 months ago in the middle of the night. I was like, hey, I'm looking at this weird Airtable you sent me. Like who's interested? You know, I'm like, it's like turned into this.
No, I mean, Charles's brand, your brand is that you, whenever I get a company from you, I'm like, I know you don't think formulaically about it. You don't have like, I'm not an enterprise software firm, so I have to have, you know, and some people really do look for only technical founders. They want a founder and a hustler, and so they want a technical founder and a hustler together, and they always look for those pairs. They won't do sole founder. So some firms really do stay true to those kind of formulaic criteria, and other ones really are really more open-ended, but that can make it frustrating because then you think that they're open-ended, but then they still say no for the typical reason. But I do think that there are some investors that really do have reputations for really either digging in heavily and being like a third founder for you. I've seen some of those on the West Coast. I've also seen investors that really think outside the box, and I do think of you as one of them. And Kate, one of those, like there isn't like a formulaic way that you two invest.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hardest things is like trying to explain to my limited partners how we pick companies, and they want it. Not all of them. Some of them want it to feel more formulaic. I'm like, I don't know. We meet thousands of them, the ones that really stand out. But man, the other thing I'll say is like we back a lot of people who don't have an entrepreneurial track record as founders. So a big part of what I'm trying to do in the meeting too is I'm trying to forward forecast. Okay, this is someone who's never fundraised, never set strategy for a company, never hired and fired without infrastructure around them of a big company. We're gonna like throw this person in the deep end. They're gonna have to do like all of this stuff. And in their personal or professional life, are there any examples of them having to like take on situations with high degrees of ambiguity and figure them out? I'd say half the time it ends up being stuff in people's personal lives. It's not a work experience that they can speak to where they were given a very ambiguous situation. Like I met someone who kind of like took over a nonprofit that they'd been on the board of and like had never run a nonprofit, had only been on the board, and they were like, you got to fix this thing. And the person's like, well, what does fixing it mean? They're like, we don't know. We just know that it's broken. And this person told me a really interesting story about how they got into that organization and figured out how it worked. So there's a lot of things that like I'm looking for that are clues that when we put people in a situation that's like highly unconstrained, highly ambiguous, oftentimes for the first time in their career, do I think they're going to thrive or do I think it's going to like overwhelm them?
So I want to go back to like when you combine these comments with your note earlier about, you know, someone calls me, okay, now you got me on the phone, like, what do you have? There's also a comment from one of the folks at Motley Fool Ventures about like, we like to have the deck first, which I know some people are like, you have to send the deck. And some people are, you know, I refuse to send the deck. We can sing that song later. But it is definitely research and coming prepared. And if I could put my friend Nate on the spot, I'll just mention, so Nate Siegel, who's with us today, worked at the Obama White House and has done all sorts of amazing things. And because he's so accomplished, gets asked, hit up for, you know, can I get some advice all the time? And how do you filter through? And I know that there are a number of people who say, okay, before we chat, I would like you to do a little bit of homework. And so give me the answers to these three things. And that really does limit the number of people you have to talk to. Is there a filter that you use like that? And it's not that you're being punitive. It's just, I'd like our conversation to be focused. And if I can actually help, you know, great. If I can't help, we should probably know that before we get on the phone.
Is this for companies or is this for kind of like the coffee chat network?
Well, really for companies or for venture funds raising a fund. And there are a bunch of those in the room as well.
I like made a asynchronous how to raise a venture fund class. And I realized I probably have talked to 200 emerging managers. And I was like, look, I'm happy to spend an hour with you. Here's the deal. I'm going to send you some stuff. If you watch these things, so it's videos and it's text. I'm like, if you read all this, I'm pretty sure you will have a better hour because all the like basic things you want to ask me, I probably have already covered them. And all we're going to do is spend the whole hour on the very specific things that you're stuck on. I've run this experiment a bunch of times. You will have a better session. But I will also meet with you if you choose not to read or listen to any of this stuff. It just means we're going to eat up the hour on things we could have done easier. We have a page at Precursor, which is like our investment criteria. When you book with me on Calendly, it's like the first line. It's like, this is what we're looking for. If for some reason you got to this page and this doesn't apply to you, we probably shouldn't meet, or if we meet, we should not meet in the context of you raising money. And both of those things have been helpful. And I think they lead to me having like better meetings in general. Some people like, if you're going to email me cold, that's probably your best shot. So like the cold email, should be like well written, clear, easy to process, easy to parse, clear statement of what the company does. Ideally, how much money you're raising so that it's in spec, ideally from the founder and CEO, not from some other random team member.
I think that the other side of that is like, I mean, your time as founders is so valuable. It is like your asset. You are running against the clock, either because of cash on balance sheet or because of market timing or something. Like, you should protect your time just as much as investors protect their time. Like we have board commitments, we have other things, like there's all sorts of stuff competing for our time, but like you shouldn't be spending time on people that can't help you, or spending time with people where you're limited to 30 minutes, so you're only getting a superficial kind of amount of the content there. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about. And so like I you know, we talk a lot about like protecting our time as investors, but I really think it's very important to shift the paradigm a little bit. Like, your time is critical. You're 30 minutes searching for a better investor or a fit of investor online, or you're 30 minutes with another founder, or you're 30 minutes with an executive in a Fortune 500 of the space you're building in. 100 times more valuable than 30 minutes with me. If you're not like ready to go in my space, in my market. And those 30 minutes on your end really compound in a powerful way. So I do encourage you to value that just as much as the kind of interest and excitement on getting an investor calendar. Because really, when you're ready, you'll be ready. And there's a lot of discovery and connection you need to be having otherwise.
And how, because you talked about how valuable that 30 minutes is, one of the questions that the founders had was, how much time in year one should a B2B founder spend on marketing and brand building? This is literally year one, not year one after launch.
Before they've raised any capital or after?
Before year one. I mean, maybe they've raised during, but.
Well, they're trying to do it all.
So pre-launch, you should spend like very little on branding and marketing. Like, I guess you figure out the company name, but you need to be building the product, thinking about, you know, what your value prop is, talking to customers. I wouldn't spend any marketing dollars or brand building without this thing live. That's kind of like number one. I think secondarily, one thing I think is really important for founders to think about is, don't announce your fundraise. Like, I have probably 40% of my portfolio has not announced, or the seed portfolio has not announced that they've raised. They don't want a target on their back. They don't think it's important. They have, you know, stories in the right places that have nothing to do with fundraising for hiring or things like that. Like your TechCrunch, your Forbes, your whatever momentum that is, that's pretty much just for announcing a fundraise and then getting folks excited about potentially joining your company. But there is a ton of value in having no press your first year or two. And that flips the other way, which is a lot of what you read in TechCrunch and Forbes and wherever we're getting our news, and Twitter, like, it's not real. Like, you know, what you'll see is a company maybe, you know, if a company hasn't announced that they've fundraised, and then suddenly you see an announcement, there's like a 20 billion, you know, a 10 million Series A, but we never learned that they raised more, and they have all of this traction and all of this insight, and you're like, oh my God, how did they do this? Like, well, it's because they had $20 million plus $5 million from their seed, and they're announcing this a year after they fundraise. Like, there's just a lot of inconsistency, and the company you build is not going to be like any other company that you read about or anything in that whole world. So like, kind of stay out of that mentality and that FOMO and that comparison, because it's just bad data for early stage companies. But it's something that everyone gets worked up about. My companies get worked up about. My founders ask us. I think it's better to be sneaky and stealthy and not brand and not market, and just be hitting your metrics and like getting your customers and like really proving product market fit first. And then you pop up and you get to scare some people.
How do you get your customers without your brand? And there's a difference between like building your brand and refining your vision of what it is that you're doing, and how you make sure that everyone is rowing in the same direction and aligned on what it is you're building toward. But how do you get your customers without building the brand? And if we're talking about like, you build your messaging and your brand by iterating, iterate, pitch, someone
Sure.
you know, put in the chat as well. Don't you need to spend time honing?
Yeah, I mean,
that?
you have, like, I guess tactically, what I I mean, I'm just going to target this to seed stage, right? Like pre-seed stage, maybe a little bit of Series A. Like soft launch is a real thing. You have your website just poof, it pops up on the internet. It tells what your company does. You know, maybe you have a couple of build partners, beta customers. You throw up their testimonials on the page, and then you just act bigger than you are. And I think I think your brand is what problem you're solving. And you as a founder, you're doing your own sales. You're having those conversations. You're talking to companies. Like, I think that's how you get started and you get momentum. And then it kind of starts to build around that. I think it's as easy as being like block and tackle at the earliest stage, being super scrappy.
What are some?
One
Go
specific
ahead.
thing. I think if you're in B2B, having excellent, highly responsive customer service for your first customers is a brand differentiator for a lot of buyers. And you can build a reputation as a company that listens to customers. Like one of our portfolio companies, like they do a blog post every week when they ship the new release, and it's always 8 or 10 features. And if you go back, you're like, wow, this is a company. If I buy this product every week, I'm gonna get something new. A bug's gonna get fixed. I'm gonna get, and it goes back basically since the beginning of time for this company. And the dominant experience you have if you use the product is that stuff gets fixed and improved a lot. And if you ever have a question, their service is very fast, and it just builds trust. It just builds trust. And it's something that the founder thought was important from day one to instill in the company. And he still does 20 tickets a week himself. And I think it matters, but it was something he thought was important from day one. But it wasn't like a big thing. It wasn't like they bought a booth at Dreamforce. Like, this is big crazy.
Yes.
It was this more like for the first people. And then when you talk to their customers, they're like, man, I love working with that company. That is their brand, but their brand is just the series of consistent actions that they deliver on for their customers. And any company can decide, we want to be known for technical excellence. We want to be known for scalability. He decided to be known for like really, really responsive support.
What are examples of early stage companies doing a great job of branding and PR?
But I think you're getting hung up on this word brand and PR, which I think is what Caitlin's saying. Don't spend on PR and marketing from the get-go, because we think of that as like, advertising or something like that. I mean, I think that when I'm investing in a company at a very early stage, I do expect, one of the reasons why I'm investing is that this person understands the problem. The founder knows who the potential beta customers are, knows why they would build it, and they can figure out who would be that first test group for them so that they can show that the product does have some demand attached to it. And if I have to help them figure that rudimentary first level, that probably isn't going to get to yes for me, because that is what a founder should have. A founder should have an immediate network so to show that they understand the problem. And by then starting to build awareness, not brand, but awareness of their product and what it can do, that's how they start to then show that there might be some semblance of product market fit, that there are some users for it.
Yeah, I have a company I invested in that's B2B in the learning and development space. Like, he literally just cold LinkedIn his first 50 customers. He was just sitting in his apartment. He's like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is a problem we're solving. I think it could work for SAP. I think it could work for blah, 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 blah. And people were like, sure, I'd love to do 30 minutes. It was a need people were anxious for and wanted. And he just hit it. And that was it. And so there's a little bit of I really encourage folks, at least at the earliest stages, don't over-engineer it and think you need marketing budget and think you need these things. Just be scrappy as hell. And I think we lost that in the last 5 years, 10 years or so, which is you got a lot of money, you hire a lot of people. It's the earliest stages of finding that moment of traction. They don't happen by hiring people. They happen by being really scrappy and trying a lot of things and trying a lot of experiments and just kind of as a founder doing it yourself and staying up late at night and messing around online, and that kind of, you'd be surprised at what hooks will work. You just have to try them.
I'll just say one thing. I think category creation is different. I think if you're really trying to get people to understand a new behavior or something that's that's hard. That's like we have a autonomous water taxi company. So it's like a hydrofoil that doesn't require a pilot. She's gotten a lot of press and PR. It's like a really cool technical innovation, but also like getting people's heads wrapped around a boat that doesn't require a driver that has an electric drivetrain is like a lot. You actually have to help people understand what all of those words mean. And so I do think like when you do category creation, I actually put a much higher emphasis on the person's ability to create a mental model for the customer than I do for the fifth expense management company that's like competing with Concur because people kind of already understand the frame for the space.
You invested in what?
It's an autonomous water. It's called Navier. It's an autonomous water taxi company.
Outside the box.
Yeah, it's a boat.
Just so we're clear, like I'm an LP in this fund.
Yeah.
I'm just,
You're also an investor in an autonomous.
I mean, that's really cool.
So, but the funny thing is, I invested in an eVTOL company. So it's a vertical takeoff and landing, basically a big drone. So I'm at the big drone company, and I was like, "Well, how much of this do you think is transferable?" He's like, "Well, the big innovation is electric drivetrain. That's what makes eVTOL work." And he's like, "You could actually apply electric drivetrain to lots of other areas." So when I came to him, I called him about this boat company. He's like, "If the people are good, it should work technically. Like you can take a lot of what we've learned about electric drivetrains and apply it to this autonomous boat."
How about a submarine with parts from Home Depot?
Whoa.
Too soon? What, too soon?
I did want to hit on one thing, which is that you guys sound like you respond to cold emails.
I do.
You do you?
I do if it's like somewhat personalized.
Okay.
I probably get, I mean, my inbox is insane, and I get so many things that aren't personalized, and I'm literally just like, I have maybe an hour and a half of email I can do a day, and I just jam. And so if it doesn't look like it's personalized, which is shocking that many aren't, like personalized, or it says the word LH or something like that, like I just can't process it sometimes. And if it looks real, I usually will read it and respond.
Yeah. I'd say that people use LinkedIn more effectively for me. I actually think that a cold email into the box, sometimes they just look too generic to me. But I do think that if people have gone at least to LinkedIn and put something personal in it, and then I can actually see their LinkedIn, so I can figure out whether it's someone that I think could actually do what they say they want to do. It's helpful. I think that I had someone once tell me that he also didn't respond to cold emails, and he said because he thought it was a very negative signal, which I kind of buy, which is that if someone is going to do this for finding their investors and they can't, and he said, "How many connections do you have on LinkedIn?" And I said, "Oh, a few thousand or whatever." That person can't find their way to someone to make a warm intro to you. Then what does that mean for their business development activities? And so.
Yeah, I think
I'm gonna push back on that.
I think that I've heard that, I obviously heard that too. I think that is fading as founders get more diverse and venture becomes more accessible, and I think like a modern investor, when I say modern, I mean younger, is way more open to cold inbound, and they're not as and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about this guy, this random guy who's like, oh, I could, LinkedIn, he needs to be a master of LinkedIn. Like, people aren't even using LinkedIn. I barely log into LinkedIn. Not you. I'm like, I don't even know I'm not even connected to Eric Hippo on LinkedIn. Like, he's not even using LinkedIn. Like, this guy's my boss. I see him every day. Like, it's too much of a crapshoot of what people are doing now, that I think, hopefully you have people on your team that are accessible in some way and can kind of manage the cold inbound. I think the days of the old white male investor being like, oh, they have to find me through one of my founders and then convince someone to send me an email. Like, if that's the guy that you're trying to get in front of, you're already behind the ball. You got to find another firm, find someone else. Cause there's going to be a million reasons why that deal isn't going to happen. And it's not going to be because you didn't get introed through someone else. That's the first step to getting a meeting. There's a million things in that comment that mean that it's not going to happen. So I think there's so many investors now. There's so many new emerging managers. There's so many other places to go, that I think that really mattered probably 10 years ago when there were fewer and fewer funds. Now you can go so many different places. So just a note to founders, don't you've got to run the process the way that you want to run the process. And like, there's not a one size fits all for venture anymore, because there's not a one size fit all investor anymore. So do the process that you think is going to work for you and be the most effective. And if you want to throw out some Hail Marys, throw out some Hail Marys and see what happens. You never kind of know. And sometimes I get hit through multiple ways of the same company, and that's also okay too. There's not just like one right way. So I'll just kind of that's my kind
We
of
took it one step further, and like as part of our onboarding, I tell our founders, I don't expect you to qualify people who reach out to you. Like, you don't have to do my job for you. Somebody reaches out to you and wants an introduction to me, just forward it. If it's your best friend or someone you worked with, or you want to give me additional context, like add it. But I don't want you to feel like you have to be a network filter for me. If somebody meets you at a party, and I get like a lot of these emails, like, I met this person at dinner. They know that I took money from you. I don't know this person, but they want to meet you. I'm like, it's my job to figure out if this person's worth meeting. It is not your job to proxy me. And they're like, thank you, because now I can just push forward and I don't have to. Sometimes like, well, I've had two meetings. I had 2 meetings with this guy. Like, are you a like? No, like, just are you a venture capitalist? Like, and I realized that some of them were like, oh, I can't send this to you until I've scrubbed it and qualified. I'm like, I'm not asking you to do that work for me. Just send the email. I will take care of it. And I'm not keeping score. Oh, you sent me 10 random people. No, you told me this is not someone that you know.
And this is like, it's going to vary from person to person. I do want to focus a little bit on the conversation in which Caitlin, I promise, was not picking on Rachel. And Caitlin, I wish you would use LinkedIn, and you should really confront Eric about.
I'm occasionally on it, and then I look at it, I'm like,
dude's your partner. Something like that.
Well,
Yeah, okay.
I just email him, hey, you know this person. Way more inefficient.
But I do want to just make a point about the cold outreach and the need for warm intros. And I've heard that framework that people use, like they should know how to get to me because I live high in this ivory tower. And if they can't scale the walls of the ivory tower, screw them. And I'm not saying that that's what this guy said, although I have a sense of what he looks like and what he wears. But it's not me. We have erected these barriers. We have excluded people who didn't go to 10 schools for so long, and people who, look a certain way, love a certain way. And it is really important that we jettison a lot of that. That makes it, if you start with the premise that we have to jettison a lot of that, that makes it really hard to filter. And Charles, it's fantastic that you want to do the filtering yourself. It's fantastic that you have hundreds of portfolio companies. I don't know how you do it. I know that for First Close Partners, which is the venture fund of funds that I started with a few colleagues, and my partner Carolina Huanca Mendoza is here, and my other partner and life partner Betsy Zimmerman is also here. They're the two GPs running the fund. We've invested in 125 venture funds across the globe that are each owned by underrepresented founding teams, including some of the funds in this room and that I've called out. But the way, we prioritize cold and warm intros, we chronologize them the same way based on when they fill out our intake form. So we do give them homework to do, and then we do our own evaluative work. And we have funded funds that have come to us cold. We have done that with funds that are non-US because we are global. It is also really hard, and because in particular we have been inviting to underrepresented demographics, we also I feel worse saying no or not getting back to someone in a timely way. And it is really helpful the more you can qualify yourself or disqualify yourself. So if you say we are an underrepresented venture fund, great, I now have some stuff I can deal with. If you say we're a fund, please call me, that's hard because I have to weed through stuff. Don't make me do the analysis. And I do think that if you're looking for Lyra Hippo and you say we're raising our Series B, well, you've dialed the wrong number, and I can now, like, that's helpful, because now I know that I can ignore that, maybe, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So it goes back to, like, you got to do some of the research if you want, and the research is the way to scale the ivory tower.
I'd also say, like, oh my God, like, we are living in the world of AI. Like, it is so easy to find a list of seed funds based on geography. It's so easy to kind of like build your pitch deck with gamma.ai. Like, there's like, there are always these moments in time when it's like really so much easier than previously to be a founder. Like, Shopify was created and it was like, oh my gosh, I don't need to like hire an engineer to build and there are these moments. And I think AI can take away and accelerate and also fact check a lot of kind of the busy work that founders get stuck on. Like, lists are not proprietary, like, find them, use them, and do kind of like research around them. So I think, like, you know, a great venture funds want to be found. Like, our whole job is top of funnel. Like, we want to see the next great companies. And I think there's, it's your job to just be a great company and, you know, it's my job to find you. Like, my job is to find you. And so hopefully I make a good impression and you reach out to me when you fundraise, but vice versa. And I think, like, if investors aren't changing to kind of keep the aperture open and be accessible, they're going to find themselves in trouble. But I think we will find that some venture funds are changing, and we hire junior people to help us with, like, the deluge and all these companies coming in. So, you know, keep trying, keep pushing, try to find slipstreams when you can, download lists when you can, target your shots very carefully. I think all of that will serve you, where you don't even really have to worry about all these goofy venture dynamics. You know, like, that's, I mean, you worry about some, you got to worry about some, but not all of them. Like, this is kind of our problem with how we approach things.
So Tanho Atta in the chat has asked, how do U.S. investors engage with non-U.S. founders? What's the best way for a non-U.S. founder or startup team to engage? And I would say, like, so Marin Bannon is here from January Ventures, and they are Europe, US based. And so they're going to have a portfolio that is both in Europe and the US. Venture funds are, you know, will have geography on their websites. And if you see a US fund that has done, you know, deals in Africa, or that has done deals in the Middle East or whatever geography you're in, like, that one should be part of the research that you can do. And people often put their board seats or even their observer seats on their LinkedIn, which Caitlin doesn't use, but, you know, a lot of us do.
It's another, it's like, I mean, I don't know. Do you guys, you must put your board seats on LinkedIn.
Only board seats, not all investors.
I go back and forth because it's like, then I've got, like, I'm on a lot of 20 companies. You have to go to, I don't need 3 pages of LinkedIn, you know, like, like I'm waiting to invest in the next generation LinkedIn, and then everything will be on it. The next
board seats, though, but it's different, like, I mean, versus like your portfolio companies. Because, I mean,
I don't even have portfolio companies.
Is taking board seats at very early stages is a lot of liability for the director.
So, spoken like a public director. I'm gonna take you out for coffee later.
How does your public investing, or your public, you know, you're on the boards of 3 different public companies, how does that change your perspective as a startup investor? And this is something that you and I have discussed a little bit before.
It certainly does when the markets have collapsed, right, in the public markets so dramatically, right? So you have real companies with real depressed valuations that, particularly a lot of companies that went out public through a de-SPAC process, they still had 100 million of revenue, SaaS revenue, right? And it's sometimes, you know, more than that, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And you've seen a lot of them trade from like $10 back to $1, $2. You got market caps of 150. Sometimes they're at 700 when you include the convertible debt they might have raised. But you look at these companies and they are moving. They're either, some of them are profitable, some of them are moving towards profitability, because the public market really doesn't have a lot of appetite for companies that lose a ton of money unless they are, you know, Tesla or something. I think that when you look at that, and then you look at companies that, you know, the worst case to be in right now, I think, are the companies that raised, you know, they were maybe second-time founder, so they raised $5 million in their first round, and then they got to pivot because it's not working, and now they've got another 5 to 7 million that they need to raise, and they've got somebody because they're a successful second-time founder, that's willing to do it at a $40-50 million pre. And I'm looking at public companies that are totally scaled, that are growing, that are break even or profitable at $150 million equity value. And I'm just like, so as a public board member, it does translate into what I think is reasonable. And as I've also, over the last 6 years of doing seed investing versus like A and B, seeing that like that going in valuation really, really makes a difference. I mean, the difference between going in at 4 versus going in at 15 is a big deal. And so it has made me much more valuation sensitive in this market.
So I've had the pleasure of, I guess maybe I was a board observer. I don't know. I took over the board from someone else. I took over I think I was just attending and seeing Rachel in action, and having that experience of, being on a seed Series A stage board and then speaking the way that she just spoke, having that kind of like public market mentality, that doesn't happen on seed and Series A boards. Like that doesn't even really happen at Series B boards, which is, it's wild. So if you could think of like building your business with that type of mentality, it's a huge plus and it's a huge value add to have that type of perspective. And honestly, like, how boards are run, governance, saying the hard right thing, like investors tend to spend more time with investors than founders. Like we go to all these goofy dinners, we talk all the time, we go to coffees, we go to drinks. Like it's no different in the boardroom. Like we're all kind of, a lot of people will not say things or not make impressions at the Series A, B, C because we're friends. And I think you've done a great job at saying kind of the hard, direct thing, which I think is powerful in rooms where there are people I'm afraid to make a peep in front of. And you know the guy I'm talking about? Like, and it's powerful to see as another person in that room. And it's, if you can get a board member like her early in the life cycle of the company, like you're so lucky. And she's like level and she's even and the world's going crazy. And like that type of steadiness too is something that I think is rare and unique. And so like, as you raise money and you raise money from different people, you want to think about the profile of that board and that board member, because that's the next step after fundraising. Yeah. So who are you going to kind of live with? And that's, who do you want emails from in the middle of the night?
That's right. I do want to focus in on your comment about governance and boardroom stuff, because I think it is so important. And I had a meeting this morning where I'm on a board and two outside board members, and we just said, like, can people please give the bad news to the founders? What they have to do is stop, in this particular case, stop saying to the founder, everything is okay, honey, and then complaining their asses off to us. And so we have to be direct. And I do feel that we have overdone it in venture with everyone has to be founder friendly, everyone has to be supportive, and it's part of your brand as a venture investor. If you are, if you give direct negative feedback, or if you say, you really shouldn't do this, I can't call the shot on this, or maybe I can call the shot on this, and I don't think that you should do this. And there's an abdication of governance that I think has led to some real problems. We're seeing this play out massively in crypto, where we as a law firm, wearing my Lowenstein Sandler hat, where we are in the offices of Lowenstein Sandler, we as a law firm have been kept incredibly busy on internal investigations, responding to third-party subpoenas, and helping our clients when there's a real government problem because people have behaved the wrong way, and it's a real issue. So making sure that you have, and I'm glad that you said, like, there are some real risks in joining a board early in the life of a company, especially if you're going to abdicate your responsibility to actually talk about the stuff that's challenging and unpleasant.
There's also a bunch of people who've just never been on a board when things aren't going well. Mm-hmm. I found also just ignorance is almost as big of a problem lately as incompetence. Maybe it's a bigger problem than incompetence. on the governance level from what I've seen. People who just literally don't know what it means to be a director of an overlapping company. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have just a couple minutes left. I want to mention in the chat, there's this thread about underrepresented founders that I started reading. People have added to it. And Nina Taylor added some great comments about having to explain issues within the community, for instance, minority healthcare, to achieve a baseline understanding even prior to pitching. While some people start their pitch with the team, we always start with the issue. And I like part of your brand, if you're an underrepresented investor, is that your lived experience is an enormous competitive advantage. Your empathy, your ability to understand market dynamics, you can skip a dozen pages in the deck because you understand the market better, and that should be investor company fit. And I'm wondering, that is something that I think, like, that's a thesis I've been investing behind with both founders that Betsy and I have invested in as angel investors, and with the venture funds that we as First Close partners have invested in. I would love to hear how you think people are effectively overcoming the fact that if their market is an underrepresented market, and this is something that you talked about as well, Caitlin, how you deal with having to go through the first 10 pages of the slide deck with someone because they have so much less of an understanding of that than if we were selling golf clubs.
Just to clarify, going through the deck with someone, meaning
that if you're dealing with an investor whose lived experience doesn't give them access to, and they have not educated themselves about an underserved market.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to kind of explain it and share it, I think. Especially because the makeup of the venture capital market is not very underserved. And so you do have to kind of educate and walk people through the problem set and make them understand, one, what actually happens, but also two, how big of an opportunity it is. And then the third piece is you have to share why you're the person to figure it out. I look almost exclusively for founder market fit. Charles was just asking me what spaces I'm interested in right now, and I never have a good answer. It's just founder market fit. For whatever reason, they know a space really well, or they had an internship or something, or they had this insight and that's what they're building in. But usually that means you have to communicate why the space is really important, and it's going to land with some people and it's not going to land with others. I think just an anecdote, we invested in a company called Lola, which is a women's feminine product company that basically tampons. And this was 10 years ago, probably. This was before my time. And one thing that they did was they had a cup of water and they had a tampon and they put it in the cup of water in front of male investors so they could kind of understand how tampons work. And so sometimes you just have to do that. You have to think of your punchy thing that gets the point across, it explains something and captures attention. I think you're not going to be able to change the room. You just have to change how someone understands the space. And some people will get it, some people won't. And you just need one yes.
And we do need to be talking more about tampons and pads at venture conferences because it needs to be part of the conversation, and it's an enormous freaking market.
Sure. Yes.
So on that note, Charles, last thing before we wrap, what's the brand of the NVCA today, and how are you as chair intending to shift it, refine it?
I think I think sometimes you inherit a brand that you didn't create. I think for a long time, most people thought of the NVCA as an organization that was principally focused on protecting the carried interest tax exemption for the venture capital industry.
But only because it was.
It was the most obvious, important, galvanizing policy activity that they engaged in. I wouldn't have gotten involved if I thought that was still our mission, and it isn't. We spent a lot of time on things that impact small and emerging manager funds, immigration, tax is a part of it because there are people in our business who care a lot about tax. But my goal is to help people understand that their venture capitalists care about more than their own personal taxation. Maybe not the easiest brand to change, but the activity is already happening. The question is now, how do we communicate to people that we're focusing on things outside of that? It's work in progress. I've been at it for about a month.
Okay, so on that happy note, first I want to thank all of you for sharing your insights, your literal undercover war stories,
Oh my gosh.
undercover water stories as well, tampon and water stories. And I want to thank all of you for showing up either in person or by Zoom and for populating the chat with interesting content, questions, thoughts. We're going to do some breakout sessions, and we have, among others, I'm really excited about the LGBT plus VC, which is a nonprofit that is focused on expanding and promoting and supporting access in that community. We've got a couple of the founders here in the room today who are going to be co-leading breakouts, really exciting group that we've started partnering with more and want to do more with. So really appreciate them being here. And in terms of just a quick reminder about upcoming events, we have our September 28th event, which is the last of the VentureCrushFG installments for this vintage. And on July 20th, we have the Women in VC event, key tax considerations for venture capital funds, founders, and operators. Hopefully, folks will sign up for that and join 6 of my partners for that conversation, which is part of a continuing series that they've been doing a great job with. So thank you all, and thank you to the Venture Crush team, and we'll be signing off on Zoom, but hope to see you soon, and thank you all so much.
Right.